G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, so, before you buy your next guitar, consider this. Okay, what you're looking at here is a relatively cheap guitar, a good starter guitar in some ways, but for somebody, I would say this is more going to be in an intermediate guitar beginner, or intermediate beginner. So you're just past that stage where you know you're going to stick with guitar playing, and you maybe had a slightly cheaper guitar. Like, I mean, you can get the fixed bridge version of this for like $250 or something like that, $300. Great starting guitar. You'll find these things used probably for about $250, $150, $200. Fantastic starter guitar at that price. That way, if you don't stick with it, you're not losing a lot. So you're not buying the upper end model for like $1,100, $1,400, $2,000, whatever, and you know it just sits there and you never play it. And there's a lot of people that do that. They spend way too much money getting into it. But this is not about your first guitar. This is about your next guitar. Maybe your second guitar, your third guitar, whatever. It's something to consider. I see a lot of YouTubers out there that have like massive guitar collections. And I mean, I'm one to speak. I've owned over 40 guitars in my life. This is guitar number 40. Now, out of the 40 guitars I've owned, most of them were El Cheapos. This one was $400 plus tax, but it's a good guitar, and I wanted a Flying V, and I wanted a jam night guitar. I didn't want to break the bank because I know what happens to live guitars. The neck ends up warped. They get scratched. The pickups end up shorted out because you sweat and beer and everything goes in it. And other people play the guitar at jam nights and they break things, and it just the fate of your jam night guitar or your gigging guitar is going to get beat up. It gets bounced around the back of a vehicle in the case or whatever. That is just so you don't want to spend a lot of money on a guitar like that. Okay, so that's why you would buy a cheaper guitar. But then, let's say you've already got your cheaper guitar for your jam nights. Maybe you're on your second guitar, or you're going on your third guitar. And you're like, well, I'm going to buy another $500 guitar, $300 guitar, $250 guitar, because it's really cool. And you buy it, and you play it, and after about 2 months, the novelty wears off. And then 6 months later, you're looking at the 3 inches of dust on it, and you're going, why did I buy that thing again? And maybe I'll trade it and buy something else with it. If you're going to be one of those guys, buy used guitars, because if you're not going to hang on to them long anyway. If you're going to take a loss, you might as well take less of a loss, right? Or you maybe get back what you paid for it, maybe not. But when you buy them new, you tend to not get back what you paid for. You always sell it for less than what you bought it for, unless it's something that gains, rarity and stuff like that you can over time make more money with, because it becomes an investment. But there's very few guitars that are really like that, unless you're getting into the really upper end guitars and stuff like that. But for the most part, before you buy your next guitar that replaces the same thing you got, maybe go to the store, play it, whatever, see if you like it, but maybe hold off on that guitar and hold out for a better one. And I'll explain what I mean. I've had some pretty good guitars. The two top guitars I got right now, and the two most expensive, are sitting over there in the corner. And that's my Gibson SG 61 reissue and my Gibson SG3. Those are the two most expensive guitars I've ever bought. And I justified it because after years of buying cheap guitars, I was just like, all those guitars that I bought and gotten rid of after I got bored with them or whatever, it was like, the money I spent, I could have bought a real extravagant guitar. But we all tell ourselves this: I can't justify buying a really expensive guitar because it's crazy money. But when you've had the guitar for over 10 years, it's like, was it really crazy money? And it also too, when you buy a really good quality guitar, it tends to take away that noveltyism of having a whole bunch of guitars that are mediocre. This is a good guitar, don't get me wrong, but it's not a great guitar. It's a good guitar. And when you go into a guitar shop, what I suggest people do, even if you can't afford them, play the upper end guitars, play the lower end guitars, and before you know it, you won't even look at the lower end guitars. Like, if you'll try it, you'll pick them up, you'll play them off the shelf just to, if it's something really cool, that's a novelty, you might buy it. But most of the time, you'll just say, okay, well, it's cool, but, I'm going to get tired of this thing in like 2 months or whatever. This guitar, I like it because it serves a purpose. I mean, this is a jam night guitar, although I, only did a little bit of jamming, but like I'm talking like taking it to the bar where it's going to get beat up and stuff like that over a couple of months, whatever. And, it will owe you nothing when you're done with it. That's fine. That's fine. But my Gibsons, I'm not taking those to the bars unless I'm getting paid big bucks. And I'll only take those to the bar once in a while. I'll take this to the bar, right? Almost every professional musician that I've ever talked to is kind of suggested the same thing. They'll pull something like this out on stage, maybe not exactly like this, but maybe it's an Ibanez, maybe it's a Stratocaster or whatever, and it's a little more beat up, it's a little whatever, and then they tell you about their phenomenal guitar at home, and everybody says, well, why don't you bring that out? When you play live, you learn the hard way that when you bring your extravagant guitars out, they don't stay extravagant for very long. An example I'll use is a guy who was hosting a jam night in Ottawa at Baseline Station. Great place to play, fun little place. I can't wait to do it again. But he had a Taylor T3 acoustic, and these things, it was with a satin finish and everything like that. So this is a really phenomenal acoustic guitar. I got to play it. It was a great pleasure. I've played them in the stores, but it was nice to play it live. But this was the guitar that everybody else played. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, he brought in another guitar. It was already within like a couple of weeks starting to show signs of wear on it. Somebody had spilt beer on it, and people slobbering on it and drooling on it and all that type of stuff. The humidity of the hot bar with the hot lights, and then you go out and it's wintertime, and he started leaving that guitar at home, or he was the only one playing it. And he says, this is the jam night guitar. He went out and bought like an El Cheapo, and then let everybody beat up on that. And when I go to a jam night, that other acoustic over there, my Ibanez AEL10, which I've had forever and a day, that's a great jam night guitar. That thing it's so solid. It's got polyethylene paint, so it's not the best sounding acoustic. And the electronics are fried out of it, and I had to put in a Dean pickup in there. But that guitar was bought with that purpose in mind. It was a $400 guitar, so I wanted something that played well. Okay, I don't want a guitar that's so cheap that it's just not playable. So $400 was what I was willing to sacrifice in these things. Now this guitar is still in prestige condition because it hasn't went to work yet. Hopefully this year it'll be going to work, and whatever. And when it does, I know what's going to happen to it. It's that fretboard is going to get stained. There's scratches going to happen to the guitar. It's probably going to get dropped once or twice. These things happen, and I'm willing to lose that in $400 or $500 for a guitar that maybe you get a year or two out of. Most guitars after 3 years start showing signs of wear, regardless of what you paid for them anyway, like fret wear and stuff like that. If you look, you'll see it. But the cheaper guitars, they also don't last. They have usually single piece necks and stuff like that, so they tend to not last as long either. But there are some guitars that are really great gigging guitars, but when you're buying your next guitar, think of the purpose you're buying it for. If you're buying it for novelty of having a guitar collection of 20 guitars that are all like $100, $200, $300, $400, $500, okay, I get that. It's cool to have a wall full of guitars. That's cool, but you're going to have guitars that are going to sit there. Now, some other guitars that I had that were pretty extravagant that I sold off. Like, for example, I had an Epiphone Les Paul, 92 Epiphone Les Paul, the first year that Gibson took over Epiphone, and it even said Gibson on the truss rod. So that was kind of a sought-after guitar, and I pretty much got back what I paid for it, and that guitar owed me nothing because it was such a solid guitar. It was I played it all over the place. Like, I don't know how many gigs I did with that guitar. But at the end, the pickups were starting to get a bit cruddy in it. The volume pots were cruddy in it. I had to, clean the thing up pretty good. It was a great guitar, and it served a hell of a purpose. And it was a good live guitar. It was just able to withstand the punishment of playing live. And I kept it in really good condition. And that wasn't a crazy expensive guitar, and it sounded great too, and it played great. Well, this thing, it sounds good, and it plays pretty darn good. It'll do the same thing. But if I'm going to be playing, like, say, getting like a really, really into it, and I'm playing every night, and you're going to be making money, and you know that, okay, well, maybe I get the upper end version of this. Some of the upper end Jacksons are just phenomenal to play, the neck through body stuff. And okay, maybe you get the same amount of time in it, but you're making enough money that you can replace it. Well, then that's a little different. That's a little different, because then you've got a guitar that you can showcase all the time, and you never regret playing the best guitar you can play on stage. But it depends where you're playing and stuff like that. So buying another cheap guitar when you already have a cheaper guitar, is it worth it? Well, what I would suggest is, rather than trying to get 20 really cheap guitars or 4 really cheap guitars, have one inexpensive guitar, because these also make great backup guitars as well. Because you could play your number one guitar, and this can be the backup. So they're good for that. So it's not so expensive, you know what I mean? That's also what I was thinking with this thing too, was as backup. But the other thing is that you're buying a guitar, the next guitar, you're going up. If you go up in your standards, you're going to get a better guitar that, okay, maybe you play it at home more than you play it live, but you might play it live once in a while if it's a venue that that it doesn't get too hot in there, the lights aren't like 6 feet from the guitar neck, and that kind of thing. You might bring your better guitar out there. Maybe it pays a little better, okay? Maybe you treat yourself once in a while to play the really good guitar on stage. But for the most time, this becomes the battle axe. Maybe you go up one, whatever. But all I'll tell you is, when you go up a level of quality of guitar, you're going to find that the cheaper guitars, you're not going to care about having 20 guitars when you have 2 really good ones or 1 really good one. You're really going to change your philosophy, because when you're on stage, for example, when you're on stage with an SG or my Ibanez RG750, that thing was fantastic on stage. That was that was pro stuff in the day, and it's still pretty good stuff. My Hammer Diablo, that guitar was as professional as you could play. If it couldn't get it out of you, you didn't have it in you. And the same like my Gibson SG. I've got to play that one live yet. I haven't played any of these Gibsons live, believe it or not. I was just starting to get back into the jamming and stuff before I moved up here when I got the Gibsons, and I just haven't got around to getting back into it, and I really got to do that. But the thing is that, yes, I will play those guitars live in certain venues, but I got to know the venue first. And it's so awesome to play those guitars live because they sound so good, they play so well, whatever. And whatever your favorite guitar is going to be, sure, you might sacrifice that guitar because it's just so awesome to play. But just understand, when you're moving up, rather than just buying a whole bunch of cheap guitars, because I've done it. I've done it. I bought an Ibanez AEL-10. I bought the G400 was a jam night guitar like this. I got rid of it. I wore that thing out. The G400, the concept I had with that was a jam night guitar. Why? Because my G1275 double neck, I only brought that out once in a while. Mind you, it was phenomenal to play that thing live, but it was a guitar that I didn't want to ruin. Again, for jam nights anyway. Maybe getting paid, yeah, okay, maybe you'll bring out a better quality guitar when it's going to make you money. But if you're playing like 1 gig a month or 1 gig every now and then, maybe, sure, no problem, you'll bring out your top quality gear. But sometimes you also got to factor in that you don't want the thing stolen, right? So some places you don't have to worry about that, some places you do. If this went missing off the stage, that would be bad. But it wouldn't be as bad as if my Gibson went missing off the stage, right? So, or my Ibanez, which did get stolen on me years ago. My hammer, I sold it because it was my frontline workhorse guitar. It was the best guitar I had, and it was like I'm craving that guitar like you wouldn't believe. That Hammer Diablo, like they were such great guitars. And it, mind you, it owed me nothing because I was playing like 4 nights a week at one point with it, and it was making money every time I went out. But it did cost. There was a reason why the neck warped on it. It had to do with the singer not realizing. Well, he kept leaving the guitars in the trunk. And it'd be like we'd be on a hot stage with spotlights on us, put the guitars in a guitar case, put them in a trunk in -40 weather, and he'd drive around all week with the guitars until the next gig. He never thought to take the guitars out of the back of the trunk. So my guitar got kind of the neck got messed up on it a bit. Not that it was completely unplayable, but and so did the other guitar players. We couldn't figure out what was going on with our guitars. It's like, what? We had to keep it readjusting. We had to raise the action up on it. It was our necks were warping. And then when we found out, it goes, oh, because we went over to his place one night, the singer's place one night. And again, he didn't do it to be malice. He he did it, but he didn't understand why what happened, right? He didn't realize it. So, we're that mad at him, but, it was one of those things. He's like, oh, we get out of the guitars. Oh, aren't you going to bring the guitars in? He's, oh, no, I leave them in the trunk. I was like, you drive around all week with the guitars in the trunk? Oh, yeah. And it was like, oh, that's what happened to the guitars, you know what I mean? So it was just the extreme hot and cold, and you can fix a warp in the neck, but I didn't do it, and I kind of regret not doing it. But that was a guitar that, it was a top-end guitar to play. It was a top-end guitar in sound, and it was stellar looking. And when I bought that guitar, it's like, I had no craving for cheap guitars. I had no craving to just have a wall of guitars that were cheap. Because all the cheap guitars I had, I didn't play. And I had a whole bunch of them. And it was just, I just ended up getting rid of them. And I got tired of getting rid of guitars, buying a guitar and, oh, this is the best guitar ever. And then when the novelty wears off, and you're buying the novelty. You're not buying a better guitar. But when you start buying a better guitar, it really sets the bar high so that you're not constantly just looking for another cheap fix. So maybe before you buy your next cheap guitar, hold off on it. Try some upper end guitars, even the ones that you don't think you can afford, because you'd be surprised when you find a guitar you really like that plays really well. Even if it's out of your price range, you'll tend to hold out for that guitar, and maybe you sell 2 cheap guitars. Again, when I had 4 or 5, at one point I think I had 5 $500, $400 guitars sitting there, and I'm saying, where's my Gibson? Here I was for years saying, I can't justify buying, these extravagant Gibsons because they're too expensive or whatever, or, another Ibanez because it was too expensive, the upper end one, or another Hammer Diablo because it was too expensive. I'll just buy these cheap guitars. But then, because you always have to live with the quality of a cheap guitar, it's never what it looks wise, they're always cool, but it never sounds as good as you want it to sound. It never plays quite as well as you want it to do. So I started getting to the point where it's like, I'd rather hold out, and even if it takes me like a lot longer to buy a better quality guitar, I'd rather buy the better quality guitar, and then delegate the cheaper guitars to the backups and to the jam nights and to the workhorse stuff. And then at some point, okay, take a plunge, maybe buy a used, slightly upper model from this, and say, okay, that's going to be a better guitar, but a guitar you're willing to sacrifice playing live with it. Now, there's some guitars people have played live with for years and years and years, and some guitars like Stratocasters and Telecasters and Les Pauls, they tend to be really good because they tend to have thicker necks and stuff like that. They tend to really hold up well. But some of these paper-thin necks guitars, sometimes they don't hold up as well over time because, they are what they are. So it's nice to have guitars that, play the best guitar you can afford, but also to have a guitar that's, you're not, when it does start to wear out on you a bit, it's not like, oh my God, I lost my number one guitar. So just a little buying tip for your next guitar. I'll leave it at that. So, excuse me. So anyway, yeah, I'll leave it at that. So before you buy another guitar that's pretty much the same thing as what you got, hold out, buy something a little better, take it up a quality, which sometimes better guitars also bring up better playing. Playability is always the thing I look at first. Style and sound are usually second, because if you play well, it sounds good anyway. So, but that said, it's also nice to have the icing on the cake and the refinement. But if you keep buying cheap guitars, you'll never get that really good dream guitar that you want. So buy a cheap guitar to start, maybe a slightly intermediate guitar like this, where this would be like the low end of the intermediate guitars. This is an excellent starter guitar, but it's a little bit pricey for somebody. $400 is a lot of money for somebody who may or may not stick with it. Like, if you know you're going to stick with it and you've had like I say, if you get one used and you play it for like a year or so, and then it's like, okay, you play every day and you know you're going to be sticking with it for life, then yeah, you go up the ladder a bit for your guitar. Next guitar. Even if you don't play that often, if you have a really good guitar, you're going to hang on to it for years and years and years and years and years. These cheaper guitars, you don't hang on to as long. You know, as soon as you have something better, you always play the better guitar. You don't, at home, you don't play the cheaper guitars as much. So they just sit there. So unless you're just collecting them for the sake of collecting them. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. So yeah, have yourselves a great day, eh? Make sure you hit that subscribe button and like button. And make sure you share the video. There you go.